First and foremost, I want to thank you so much for coming on my platform. I really appreciate you taking out the time to stop by and talk to us about some of the amazing things that you've been doing.
Well, I'm happy to do it, man.
All right, all right. Now, for the viewers who may not recognize you, could you let them know who you are and definitely what you do?
Sure. So my name is Kevin Hymel. I'm an historian for the U.S. Army. And in my spare time, I write a lot of articles and books. And I'm making a movie right now because a long time ago, I started writing about a certain Army unit called the 6888 Central Postal Directory Battalion. And that is going to be made into a movie that's going to be coming out in December. And then later in December, it'll be coming out on Netflix. And that is produced and directed and written by Tyler Perry. And
Wow.
I got a dog right here who's he wants attention, so I'm gonna have to pet him from time to time during our interview. I hope that's not a problem.
No, not at all. I definitely understand. That's
Okay.
amazing. Wow, that's really inspiring. Now I can ask you, when did you develop this passion for history? Have you always been like a history buff, or is it something you kind of got into later in life?
No, to be honest with you, when I was a little kid, I used to write stories about my GI Joes. And so now I'm 58 years old and I'm still doing it. I do a lot of veteran interviews. I've written a number of books on General George S. Patton. In fact, I'm writing a trilogy on the general, and I've completed the first two volumes, and I'm working on volume 3 right now.
Wow. Okay. Okay. It's amazing because a lot of times people take history for granted, but it can be very empowering. We can learn so much from so many great people.
Yep. Yeah. And that's what I find so inspiring about history are the people that made a difference to make the world better for other people. And that's a lot in my studies of World War II. I mean, they're fighting the ultimate crusade, and the war, for all of its tragedy, really makes the United States a better country because we are a segregated nation, and sort of the ugliness of racism and segregation are exposed because of this united effort the country has to have. And without everybody pitching in and treating each other with dignity and respect, we'd still be in the dark ages, if you ask me.
Yeah, definitely, definitely agree. Now I wanted to talk more about the film, the 6888 movie. Now what inspired you to even, select this story to try to make a film out of it?
Well, the story actually found me, and it was a big surprise, the movie. So I think it was 2008. I was working for an Army program. It was called Freedom Team Salute, and it was an effort to salute veterans and people that supported soldiers. And one of my coworkers came to me and she said, "Hey, I found some veterans from this unit, the 6888, and I had never heard about it." And she said, "Well, it's the only all black, all female WAC unit, Women's Army Corps, to go overseas during World War II. Would you be nice?" Um, and so immediately I was fascinated with it. And I said, "Well, I would love to write a story on it." And so she said, "Well, there's these 3 veterans." And so I went to one of, her name was Mary Ragland, and she lived in Northeast DC. I was living in Virginia at the time. And so I drove up to her apartment and went in and interviewed her. And she's telling me about, the training the women went through in the United States, the training they went through to prepare to go overseas, going on a troop ship when a lot of them had never left the United States before. And, getting to England and seeing these bombed out cities and being given this task to catch the mail up, and given only 6 months to do it. There's a huge backlog, warehouses full of it, because, in Europe, soldiers are getting wounded, they're going to hospitals, they're getting transferred to other units, and they're getting killed. And so these letters that are coming and can't find the recipients are getting bounced back to warehouses in England where they just sit. Give me 45 minutes, buddy. Okay. So I apologize for the dog. And so I'm interviewing Mary Ragland about this, and I'm just fascinated with the whole story that she's telling me. And a study had been done about the 6888, but it was by a social historian, whereas I'm a military historian. So I really took it from the military point of view. And Mary goes into her closet after a while and brings out all these documents from the battalion. And I'm reading them and looking. I said, where'd you get these? She said, well, I was a clerk and I kept copies of a lot of the paperwork. And so I immediately drove down to the National Archives and I said, guys, I want to see all the files on the 6888. And they said, we don't have any, nothing. So I went back to Mary and I said, Mary, you are the archives of this unit. And it really disappointed me, but I wasn't surprised. This has happened to me before at the archives with a lot of Black units from World War I and World War II. The records are just missing. There were 2 Black divisions in World War II. One fought in Italy, one fought in the Pacific. There were a lot of Black MP units and what were called service battalions. And a lot of them, the records are just missing. And there's part of me that wonders if like just white officers were throwing them off the troop ships at the end of the war. So Black soldiers would not get the veterans' rights, and benefits when they returned to the United States. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's a different explanation, but it was just shocking to me that it just happened that the one unit of African-American women overseas, the records are gone. So I wrote this article. It got some play. Then we had our ceremony for the ladies in 2009. And then, I moved on. I did other research projects. The Army canceled the program. So found work in other places. And I was working a couple of years ago in San Antonio, Texas, at Lackland Air Force Base. I was a historian for the Air Force Medical Service. And I had worked at Fort Leavenworth in Kansas. And suddenly people are starting to call me and saying, hey, they're building a monument to the 6888. There's these posters up. You got to get a hold of these. Buddy, I know. We just went for a long walk. It's going to be okay. They said, you got to contact these folks. And so they gave me the number. All right, you relax, you sit. And I called the gentleman in charge of it. His name was Carlton Philpott. And Carlton says, Kevin, we found 3 new members of the 6888, and we're going to have them at this ceremony. And I said, well, tell you what, I'll do you a favor. Why don't I interview one of these ladies? I'll get it published in World War II magazine. And that way, when the monument is completed, we'll have a magazine article to go along with it. So he gives me this woman, Lena King. And I got to tell you, I've interviewed a lot of vets. I usually call them 2 times, maybe 3. With Lena, I talked to her maybe 10 times. She was a total hoot. She was 94 years old, still went out dancing every night, cooked her own meals. And I just had such a great time talking to her. And she could not believe somebody was contacting her to talk about something that happened almost 80 years previous. She's like, this was just a tiny slice of my life, Kevin. I said, yeah, but it was really important. And so I interviewed her. We had a great time. I go to meet her. In fact, this is kind of embarrassing. After all these phone calls, I called her. I said, Lena, I'm going to see you at Fort Leavenworth in November, for this monument dedication. And she said, Kevin, I can't wait because your voice to me sounds just like Dr. Lewis Henry Gates. I thought, oh my God, she thinks I'm Black. She's going to have a heart attack when she meets me. And so I traveled to this event. It was a beautiful event. They put the 3 veterans in cars and they waved to crowds as they drove them through the fort. And then they brought them to a big rectory room where they signed autographs and everything. And I walk up to her and I go, Lena, it's me, Kevin. Oh, Kevin, and like there was the initial shock, the heart attack I was predicting. And, but then she broke out into a smile and we started chatting. And with a lot of veterans, the way I reach them is I contact their children because the children have, internet email addresses and things. And so she starts calling her granddaughter over and she's like, come here. You got to meet Kevin Hymel. And this woman spun around. She goes, you're Kevin Hymel? I said, yeah. She goes, well, my name is Edna Cummings. She was a colonel in the U.S. Army. She said, we used the language from your original article to write the legislation for the Congressional Gold Medal for these women. And I just said, you know what? There's nothing you could have told me to make me feel better than I do right now. And so Edna was sort of the point of the spear of getting these women the Congressional Gold Medal. She did all the organization for it and everything. And so I was very happy with the story. I was very happy that I was able to contribute to these women getting the recognition they deserved. And I thought, okay, I'm done, time to move on to the next thing. And my publisher at World War II magazine, WW2 History magazine, Carl Nam, calls me up a few weeks later. He says, listen, I think this story is so good, I'm going to send it to some Hollywood producers. I'm like, okay, this has never happened before. I don't know what to believe, what not to believe. And a few weeks later, I get a call from a woman named Carlota Espinoza. And she says, this is a fantastic story. We want to make it into a movie. I later found out that there have been efforts to make a movie about the 6888, but they didn't have what I've learned. Now I've learned all this Hollywood talk. It didn't have a hook. And when I interviewed Lena, she told me that when she was growing up in Philadelphia, she was very good friends with a white Jewish boy. And he goes off, he joins the Army Air Corps and is killed in combat. And so to honor his service, she joins the Army. And Carlota said, that's the hook. That's how we make the story personal. And so they said, we're gonna shop it around. We're gonna see who likes it and everything. And so she would call me from time to time. I mean, it took a little while, but then finally one day she calls me up, and she has a partner, Kerry Selig. And so Kerry and Carlota called me up, and they said, listen, we've been talking with Netflix and expect a phone call from Tyler Perry in a few days. And I'm like, no. Tyler Perry, that's like a genius movie maker. I'm not going to hear from this guy. 10 days later, Tyler calls, and I said, hi, Mr. Perry. He goes, no, you call me Tyler. And he goes, are you the guy that wrote this article? And I said, yes, sir. He goes, okay, Kevin, from now on, you're my best friend. And to hear that from Tyler Perry was just amazing. And so from then on, Tyler and I were talking every other day, every other week. He was working on the script. He would run historical information by me. I would try to help him out the best I could. He called me one time. I was out at lunch with a friend, and he's like, how would soldiers run? And my friend and I are running through the restaurant, like pretending we're holding rifles, to make sure that we're helping. My buddy was a former Marine, so it really helped. And it's been more than I've ever expected. He flew me out to LA for the table read. He flew me down to Atlanta. He made me a technical advisor on set. And I'll never forget the table read. I meet all these beautiful young ladies that are going to be in the movie. And we go into this room with a long table, and we're all kind of sitting there getting prepped. And all of a sudden there's this booming voice, let's make a movie. And we all turn. It's Kerry Washington striding into the room. And if I had a nickel for the expression on each one of these young ladies' faces to see, such an iconic Hollywood star come in to work with them, I mean, it was priceless. So just it's been an amazing, amazing journey for me. I love to write. I write articles. I write books. I never in a million years would have thought I would be, smack dab in the middle of a movie.
Wow, that's amazing, man. That's truly amazing. I mean, that whole story and, what they went through and sacrifice. And like you said, it was so long ago, but you being able to regenerate what happened. And I seen the trailer. The trailer was amazing. I really look forward to seeing that film, and for you to be a part of it, not only, putting the story together, gathering the information. That's just phenomenal.
I agree.
Yeah, most definitely, man. Now let me see. I'm still processing the information. So many stories.
Mm-hmm. So it's interesting. There's the 6888 Association, and that's Edna Cummings and Liz Helm Frazier, and so they've done so much to help the veterans from this unit to get the story out there. And so they would call me after this, and they'd say, "Kevin, we found another vet." And I'd say, okay, would you like maybe a Black woman to interview her? And they'd say, nope, you know the story, you know how to write, you interview her. So I was like, okay, I put it out there. But it means a lot to me because, yes, I have done the research. I have interviewed at least one veteran, so it leads to another and another. So I've interviewed 3 of the veterans since. I've actually interviewed more than 3 because I interviewed the original 3 back in 2008. And then some of the women I've interviewed and their memories just aren't there. And so it wasn't really something I could make an article out of. But it's just something to be I'm very excited to be associated with it. You know, I studied General George S. Patton, who's a bit of a racist and anti-Semite, even though he's a military genius. And so to be able to interview these women who are such pioneers, you know, they really changed the face of the U.S. Army. The U.S. Army, it's a white young man when you think of it. And for these Black women to leave their homes, by the way, none of them were drafted. Every single one of these women is a volunteer. So they volunteered to put themselves in harm's way for our nation. And it just breaks so many barriers. Lena faced a lot of prejudice. There's a lot of sexism. The battalion commander's name is Charity Adams. She's an amazing leader. Her papers are at the Library of Congress. She's passed away now, but I was able to access her papers and read stories where Black soldiers would show up to the 6888, kind of some of them drunk, waiting for the women to come out because they're looking for dates. And Charity Adams just sends them on their way. And so there's challenges on every level, not to mention doing their mission, which is to catch the mail up in 6 months. And there's so many people that want them to fail. You know, Black women cannot do such a complex job. At one point, Charity Adams, she puts the unit, so it's about 4 companies make up a battalion. So we're looking at about 845 women into 4 companies. And she would rotate them, you know, to be pitching mail while another group slept, while another group was off duty. And so that's how you keep your troops fresh doing their job. And a 1-star general comes by and he says, you know, they make the, we're going to come by and we want to inspect the unit. And so she falls 3 companies out for inspection. And they say, where's the 4th unit? And she goes, well, they're pitching mail. They're doing the job. And this general blows up at her. And he says, I told you to have the battalion out here for inspection. You can't do your job. I'm going to replace you with a white lieutenant. And totally out of military protocol, Charity Adams says, over my dead body. Now, we don't know what happened. He leaves, but he comes back a week later and apologizes and offers to let her use his limo whenever she needs it. So, you know, the woman stood her ground. They started a Black USO just for women in London. And she gathers the together and she says, I can't tell you not to go into that USO but I'm not going to, because if we step foot in there, we're agreeing to segregation. And so because of Charity Adams' leadership, the unit has great cohesion and they complete the 6-month mission in 3 months.
Okay, man, that's really interesting, and I appreciate what you're doing, because even like I said earlier, a lot of people take history for granted, but even more so women's history, they always get overshadowed or even left completely out, you know. So
Right.
I really, really look forward to this film. That's truly amazing. Now, let me see. Okay, I want to ask you about the books. You got Patton's War Volume 1 and Volume 2. Now, what inspired you to select Patton in particular, and what was the process like?
So always fascinated with the general ever since I was a young teenager, maybe like 13 years old, and I saw the movie with my father. And just what an interesting character, because he seemed to be having conflict with the Germans, with his superiors, with himself. He was always kind of at war with somebody. And so I went to write a paper about him in World War I. And in my research, I found his photo albums, the pictures he took with his own camera. And so I started researching it. I talked to some of the better known Patton historians, Martin Blumenson, and they helped guide me. I made it into an article, but there was so much information there and so many fascinating photographs, I made it into a book. And then from there, a friend of mine challenged me in 2004 to write sort of the ultimate Patton book. And I said, no, it's already been something new. And I started looking into it and I realized, you know, there's so many people that said they met Patton on the battlefield. What if we incorporate those stories into his diaries and letters? I think there's a story to tell there. And what I started finding out is there's a lot of myths about him that have existed for so long that nobody's challenged them. And so I was able to knock down a lot of myths. And one of the big things when I started working on volume 2, because we were coming out of the pandemic, I went to the Library of Congress and I said, this part in November of 44 where he predicts the Battle of the Bulge, I was looking at his typed up diaries. So he kept a hand diary, then his wife typed them up. And that's kind of what everybody uses because his handwriting is very poor. But I looked at the handwriting diary and that prediction wasn't there. And they said, oh, by the way, during the pandemic, we digitized his handwritten diaries and then did translations next to them. And so what I come to find out is the typed up diaries were incredibly embellished. There's entire paragraphs that he never wrote. They've got him predicting things, being very critical of other people, but it's not in the original handwritten diaries. And what I found out was his wife actually incorporated 2 of the officers from his staff to help her. And it's almost like they're settling scores. If they don't like a certain general, they create a paragraph where Patton's critical of the general. If they like somebody and he's critical, they take that out. And so I was able to give a clearer, more truthful portrait of General Patton. It just became a much bigger project than I predicted. It was supposed to be 1 book, and now it's going to be 3. Now, obviously, the first 2 volumes are out. But it's been a great experience for me because it's when you write anything, you learn it better. So by writing him out for all of World War II, I'm seeing the order in which things happen. I can compare it to other people's diaries and letters. And I just love creating a scene and describing events. And so it's been a wonderful exercise. However, I've gained about 15 pounds because when you do a lot of writing, you're not at the gym and you're not walking and you're sitting on your butt. But it's such an interesting contrast to study him and study the 688. And what we were talking about embellishment, 2 things. One, Benjamin O. Davis was the only Black general in World War II. And Patton does have a meeting with him. And Patton is very critical of the amount of rapes that Black soldiers are being accused of. Now, that sounds horrible. Yes, Black soldiers are raping people. What we have to consider is when this is occurring in the 1940s, where in the U.S. Army, if a Black soldier dates a white woman, that is considered rape. So that is the risk Black soldiers are taking when they go to England and France. And the British and the French love all Americans. They're fascinated with African-American soldiers. They're happy that their daughters are dating them. And white soldiers are seeing this and freaking out. Patton even writes about it in his diary. He goes, we're in dangerous ground after this war because Black soldiers are going to go back and date white women, and it's not going to work. So that's one thing that we got to consider, that we have to interpret for its time. It's not what it seems like on its surface. And then the other part of it is after their meeting in the typed up diaries, Patton says, that Benjamin O. Davis seems like a very competent Negro. He doesn't say that in the handwritten diaries. He definitely uses an N word, but it is not Negro. And I think that is very telling of who General Patton is. And of course, you can say, oh, it's the time, but there's lots of white officers that would not tolerate that kind of language or attitude.
Oh, wow. That's really, really amazing. That sounds very interesting as well. Now, how long did it take? I mean, in, I guess, combination 1, 2, and, working on 3. How many years have you spent working on it?
So I probably didn't get serious about it till 2005. And I had some difficulties with my agent. He wanted to, get this to Simon and Schuster and all the big publishers. And they came back and said, no, everything's already been written about Patton. There's nothing new to learn. And I said, well, then let's go to the next tier. And he says, no, you're going to change your book to be about Patton and Eisenhower so we can stick with. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. I've done 10 years of research. And so it kind of floundered for a while because I would argue with friends. Nobody wants this book. And one of my friends who was really encouraging me was a professor at University of Missouri, Rolla, Dr. John McManus. And we got into an argument one day. This was, let's see, this was about 2016. And I said, John, nobody wants this book. And he goes, but you found out so much new important information. You've got to do it. And I said, okay, well, what's the University of Missouri willing to do? And he goes, oh, we'll publish it because University of Missouri Press. And I said, done. And he goes, no, but we're a small press. I said, no, John, if we don't do this with University of Missouri Press, it'll never get done. And so I really started focusing on in 2016, was able to get the first book out right at the tail end of the pandemic. Started work on the other book. The other book came out last year. And now I'm 2/3 of the way through volume 3, which means I'm probably going to put on another 10 pounds. And I'm hoping to have it out in 2005. So passion project. I love writing. I love seeing my books on the shelf, but it's work.
Yes, indeed. It is work. And I take my hat off to you because the reader, a lot of times we take for granted, we read this book, it's 300 pages, 500 pages. We don't realize you spent a decade just doing research alone and you still working at it, but this information, it'll last till infinity, 100 years from now, people will be able to utilize, that hard work that you've been putting in. So I definitely appreciate that for sure.
And I'll tell you, Taye, one of the things that I've done to sort of bring him to life, I have traveled across the country and even over to Europe to find firsthand accounts from soldiers that met Patton on the battlefield. And a lot of those records now are with the Library of Congress in the Veterans History Collection. So I have spent not hours, but probably months just listening to World War II interviews with soldiers. And fortunately, they talk about, growing up, going overseas. And so I kind of know where to fast forward, but I've been searching for all these tiny stories. Sometimes it's just a sentence to get it in there. And somebody said on volume 2, I wish there was more of those soldier firsthand accounts. I'm like, come on, man.
Wow, that's amazing because, people dream of visiting them places. I'm a world traveler. I've been to 70 countries. I've been to Europe a few times. I really enjoyed it. People just dream of going there for a vacation, but to be able to go there to actually do something so noteworthy, it's just tremendous. Now, I can ask you this. Have you considered or thought about, this film this book project becoming a documentary or even a film?
We're in discussion for making it into a miniseries for Patton. And so the producers that have helped me make, not helped me, gotten me with Tyler Perry and gotten this movie made. So we've had a couple of meetings, and the last couple of meetings, I just said, you know what? Let's not even talk about this. Let's wait till the 6888 movie comes out. If people like it, we got street cred. And then we can, start to put this together. But that would be my dream for Spielberg and Hanks to turn it into a 3-season miniseries. I don't know if I'll get all that, but I think there's an interesting story to be told that we can tell now in the 21st century and show Patton with all of his genius on the battlefield, but all of his sort of warts and backwards thinking when it comes to social justice and race.
Yeah, definitely. It'll happen, definitely, most definitely. So yeah, we're about 30 minutes in. I really, really appreciate you. I know you're busy, I know you're working hard, but to stop by here really means a lot to me and sharing that history with me. And for sure, I know people are definitely going to enjoy that film. Like you say, you got Kerry, you got Tyler, and with your research and everything else, man, it's gonna be big.
Well, if I could just add quickly, President Roosevelt will be played by Sam Waterston. Mrs. Roosevelt will be played by Susan Sarandon. And Mary Bethune is going to be played by a woman. I forget her last name, but her first name's Oprah. And so that all of my sisters want to meet Oprah because of this. And I just got to add, being on set with Tyler Perry was such an amazing experience because, and Tyler and I have talked about this, a lot of his movies are about individual people and everything. And here he's directing 400 people, these large crowds that he's never done before, but you would never know it on the set. There was a scene where the whole battalion had to march, and they're marching towards the camera, and Tyler's there with his bullhorn. And so all these young ladies march towards the camera, and he says, cut. He says, ladies, you got to march better. Come on, you're black. And then he says, don't make me yell at you. And worse, don't make Medea yell at you. And then he just goes into this high-pitched Medea voice, you gotta get, and everybody's cracking up. And it just the mood he brought to the set. Yes, this is very serious. There's money involved. There's all these extras, but he was able to get these people to do everything he wanted them to do through humor and instruction, never angry. It was an honor to be at his side during that, and just, telling him historically what he needed to know. And I was waiting for him to like put his arm around me and go, everybody, this is Kevin Hymel, the guy that, but he was directing all this stuff. And he just looked at me and he goes, Kevin, would there be women here in this scene? Yes, Tyler, there would. They would have been nurses. Thanks. But, and then I'm like, you know what? You're a cog in the machine right now to a director that's trying to make a major motion picture. You are here just to help him. And so, but it was an amazing experience that I never thought I'd find myself in. And so I'm just so glad. Maybe my contribution is this much, but to be able to have my name associated with Tyler Perry and Oprah and Kerry Washington, just dream come true, man.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's very, very empowering. I mean, like you said, you started young with the GI Joes, and look how far it has taken you. So that could be a very inspiring situation for the viewers. So I definitely look forward to checking out the film in December. You said.
So the Hollywood premiere is December 3rd. And then on December 20th, it'll be going on Netflix. It has to be in the theaters for at least 2 weeks to be Oscar worthy. And then it'll appear on Netflix December 20th. And having seen rough cuts of the film, I think Kerry Washington is going to be nominated. That's just my prediction.
Yeah, definitely. That's one of them films I would definitely like to see in the theater. Most definitely. And you played a major part. You put it together. So I appreciate you. And I appreciate the viewers for tuning in. It's been a phenomenal episode. So until next time.